Hello and welcome to this video on capacity utilisation. Let's start off by picturing the canteen and considering what is the capacity of the canteen. Well, let's assume the canteen can sit 200 people. It has the maximum capacity of 200. And if we then assume that 180 students are actually seated in the canteen, how much of the canteen's capacity is being used? 90% of the seats are taken, so 90% of the canteen's capacity is being used. Would that be good for the canteen or bad for the canteen? Depends on your point of view. And that's what we're going to look at in this video today. We're going to look at what is meant by capacity and capacity utilisation for a business. There are some calculations involved, then we're going to look at the implications of under and over capacity utilisation and how capacity utilisation can be improved. Let's start off with our definition of capacity. What does this word mean? Well, capacity is how much output a business can achieve in a given period of time. Once you've taken that down, let's have a look at some examples. So let's consider a first example, the capacity of a plane. What is the maximum output, number of people that it could carry? Well, it would be determined by the number of seats within the plane. So a capacity of a plane might be something like 280. What about the Emirates Stadium? What's the capacity? Well, this is a well-used phrase in football, capacity. Well, the capacity is the total maximum number of people that they can provide for, the number of seats. What might be the capacity of a restaurant? Well, think maybe carefully about this one. Is it the number of seats? Well, actually, it'd probably be the number of people that they could serve in an evening. Often restaurants have 2 sittings, so if they have 50 tables, they might be able to, the capacity might be 100 guests that they can serve. So the capacity is the maximum output or number of customers a business can provide or produce in a period of time. Now, capacity is an important consideration for a business because it can change. So when a machine is having maintenance, if one of your aircraft is having maintenance, your overall capacity is reduced. It's also linked to labour. For example, of a restaurant, if they are working more shifts, then you could potentially serve more customers and increase capacity. Capacity also is a concern for a business because you need to take into account seasonal or unexpected changes in demand. So for example, chocolate factories, they need to be able to make a lot at Easter and a lot for Christmas, and so they need to make sure the output they can produce in a certain period of time is sufficient for those peak periods of time. Likewise, for an ice cream factory, they need to make sure the maximum they can produce is sufficient that they can produce enough, say during a heat wave. So that's capacity. Now we're going to move on to this term, capacity utilisation. If you look at the words, capacity, how much they potentially can produce, and utilisation. If something is being utilised, it's how much is it being used. So our definition of capacity utilisation is the proportion or percentage of a business's capacity that is actually being used over a specific period. Again, there is a formula that we need to know, we need to learn to be able to calculate capacity utilisation. And we calculate it by saying, well, how much is actually being produced? What is the actual level of output? And we divide by how many could possibly be being produced, or the capacity, and we times 100. And the answer, that's right folks, it's a percentage. Let's have a look at an example. This circuit board manufacturer is capable of producing 150,000 units a month. In the latest month, the actual output was 127,500 units. So, what was the capacity utilisation for that month? How much of their capacity was being utilised? Grab your calculators, pause the video, have a go, and let's see if you get it right. Well, the capacity utilisation for that month, using the formula, would be the actual output divided by the maximum potential output or capacity times 100. So in this situation, the business will be operating at a capacity utilisation of 85%. Let's consider some more examples. A jumbo jet or an A380. What is the capacity? Well, maybe 400 seats. What is the actual output? The number of passengers on board, let's say 200. So in this situation, what would be the capacity utilisation? Well, 50% of the plane's capacity is being utilised. Let's consider your mobile phone. What is the capacity? Maybe a certain number of gigabytes. What is the actual usage or storage you've got on there? Maybe 21 gigabytes. So what is the capacity utilisation? How much of the capacity of your phone is being used? 74%. Let's consider an amazing football stadium. What is the capacity? It's the number of people it could potentially hold. And if it's really bouncing and there's a good crowd in, let's say 4,500, what is the capacity utilisation? 95%. As we would expect, that ground has a very good capacity utilisation. 95% of the seats and the standing area is being taken by customers. Now there's a relationship between how well a business uses its capacity and the unit cost. Let's assume here that the capacity is 250, fixed costs are 10,000 and variable costs are £100 per unit. The table here illustrates how unit costs will change as capacity utilisation increases. So on the left we have our capacity. Now the capacity doesn't change, it's 250 units, the maximum number of units that could be produced. Here is how many units are actually being produced, and we can see it's increasing here up until the maximum. Here they are at 100% capacity, making all the units they could possibly produce. So this column here shows us our capacity utilisation, actual divided by capacity. Our fixed costs don't change, our variable costs increase as we make more units. So then here's our total costs. On the far right hand column we have our cost per unit. Now take a second and look what happens, or the relationship between capacity utilisation and unit cost. As capacity utilisation rises, the unit costs begin to fall. So as the business uses more of its potential to produce units, there are a greater number of units to spread over the fixed costs, and so the unit costs decrease over time. So a business becomes more efficient as it increases its capacity utilisation. It's got less spare resources that it's not using. So capacity utilisation, CU, has a direct relationship with unit cost, or UC. So you can see there is a mirror between the two. Capacity utilisation goes up and unit cost goes down. So we've looked at capacity and capacity utilisation and how you calculate it. We're now going to look at some of the implications of under and over capacity and how it could be improved. Let's consider underutilisation of capacity first of all. And what this means is we've got a low level of capacity utilisation. Let's say 30%, something like that. So only 30% of what we could produce is actually being produced. So if it was a restaurant, there'd be lots of chairs, but it'd be pretty empty. What might be the causes of that? Well, if there's a new competitor, maybe attracting customers, so you're not as in demand, then you won't be producing as many, even though you could potentially produce a lot. Likewise, if people's tastes have changed, or if you've done some marketing to try and attract customers and it hasn't been very successful, or maybe it's seasonal. If it's an ice cream factory in the middle of winter, you'd expect to have a pretty low utilisation of capacity. Are there any good effects of not using your capacity very much? Well, if you get a sudden increase in demand, then the capacity is there, you can very easily produce more to meet that demand. So I guess that would be a good thing. Also, you've got more time. If you're not as busy, not producing as many as you could do, you've got more time to maintain your equipment and train your staff. However, the bad effects, as we've established already, it's likely that if you have low capacity utilisation, you're going to have higher unit costs, and higher unit costs is going to mean lower profit margins. Also, if you're not very busy, staff morale may fall, staff may become unmotivated, may be bored. Also, what do you think of when you see a restaurant that has lots of empty seats? Possibly that it's not very good, so there could be a negative brand image. So what might a bit of business do about this? Well, maybe they do nothing. Maybe if it's seasonal reasons, there's not much you can do about that. But they might consider other things, maybe increasing marketing activity, trying to attract more customers, or maybe, do we need to be that big? Do we need to have such a large capacity? Do we need a huge restaurant when perhaps we could move to a smaller premises, have a smaller restaurant, and have better unit costs? Okay, the next issue is, what if we have overutilization of capacity? What if our capacity is 99% or maybe 100%, or sometimes in certain circumstances you can go over 100% when you're really working your machinery very, very hard, you're not maintaining it, you're asking your staff to do overtime, you're really producing at your absolute limit. What are some of the issues associated with this? So we're talking about businesses that are very, very busy, producing as much as they potentially can. What might be the reasons? Well, you might find that you're very in demand, you run a successful marketing campaign, or maybe it's your prime time of year, for example, the run up to Christmas, possibly for a Christmas tree manufacturer. Good effects, well, as we've seen, very busy, high utilization of capacity, low unit costs, so good profitability. The staff maybe feel motivated, good morale because they're very busy, and they feel also that they've got good job security, definitely in demand and a secure job. Bad effects, well, it could be quite stressful. If you're operating at the maximum possible, people are being pushed as hard as they can, then there's maybe stress on staff, which might lead to mistakes. You've got to maybe pay them overtime as well for the extra work that they're doing. If you get an additional customer who says, I'd like to make an order, and you say, well, actually, we can't. We're making the maximum we possibly can. There is no scope to make any more, so you'd have to turn away customers. The last thing there is, if you're producing the maximum you possibly can, working 24/7, using all your resources, have you got time to maintain your equipment and machines? And what will happen if you don't? So what might you do if you've got very high or overutilization of capacity? Again, you might think it's great, we're busy, do nothing about it, but you could consider something else. Maybe expand capacity. So actually invest in increasing the size of your restaurant, or buying new planes, or moving to a bigger football ground, or buying a larger factory. Perhaps subcontract, and that is where you pay another company to produce some of your products for you. So maybe that would help you if you're really at your limits. We'll pay this other company to make the products for us, and that frees up some time for us to maintain our own equipment, for example. Or perhaps increase price so that you reduce or restrict the amount of orders, the level of demand you have for your products, and so you have a more manageable or sustainable utilization of capacity. So, some final thoughts on capacity. In general, we would say high capacity utilization is better than low, because it implies the business is more efficient and more profitable. Capacity has a cost. If you don't use it, if you have lots of planes with no passengers, if you have a very large restaurant with no customers, if you have a huge football ground with no fans, then there is a cost to that. So you need to try and use your capacity as best as you can as a business. Flexibility is also important. The ability to adjust to meet changes in demand. Being able to scale up capacity or scale down capacity can also be an important factor. So we've looked at capacity utilization, how to calculate it, under and over, and how capacity utilization can be improved. That's all. Thank you.